struggling single dad, shares his last sandwich with crying kids. Then one whispers, "You're my hero." Snowflakes stung Ethan Walker's cheeks as he hurried across the park, his toolbox slung over one aching shoulder. The wind sliced through his thin jacket, but he kept his head down, focusing on getting home to his daughter and the single sandwich tucked in his bag. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Crying, faint, shaky, and full of fear. He slowed, breath clouding in the icy air, scanning the white haze. There, near the far bench, 3 small shapes huddled together, snow piling on their hair and shoulders, like they'd been sitting there far too long. His pace quickened. "Hey, kids!" His voice carried over the wind. Firm but gentle. "What are you doing out here all alone? In weather like this, you're going to freeze." The oldest boy lifted his head. His cheeks were blotchy from tears, his nose red from the cold. I can't find my mom," he stammered, voice trembling as much as his hands. Beside him, a little girl held a younger boy tight against her chest, her lips pale, her eyes wide. "We're hungry," she whispered, almost as if she was afraid to admit it. Ethan's gaze swept the park, empty. No adults, no movement, just the wind hissing through the bare trees. He dropped into a crouch, meeting their eyes. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, trying to keep his tone calm. The boy only shook his head, eyes glassy with cold. Ethan's hand went to the inside of his coat, fingers brushing the brown paper wrapper of the sandwich he'd bought on the way home. Cheap white bread, a thin layer of meat and cheese. It was all he had for dinner, something he had planned to split with Emma, his little girl waiting at home. His stomach tightened at the thought, but the sight in front of him, 3 kids with wet mittens, thin coats, and trembling lips, pushed the thought away. He unwrapped the sandwich, the paper crinkling sharply in the stillness, and tore it into 4 uneven pieces. He kept the smallest for himself and held the rest out to them. "Here," he said quietly, "it's not much, but it'll help." The boy hesitated for a moment before taking a piece. He bit into it, chewing slowly, watching Ethan with a look somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. Snow clung to his lashes, melting into tiny rivulets down his face. "You're my hero," he murmured, so softly Ethan almost thought he'd imagined it. The youngest boy suddenly coughed, the sound rough and rattling in his small chest. Ethan immediately stripped off his jacket and wrapped it snugly around the child, feeling the bite of the wind hit his own skin. "Easy now," he murmured, rubbing the boy's back. "We need to get you warm." He looked at the older two, his voice firm but kind. "Come on, let's get you somewhere safe." The girl glanced at her brother, then reached for Ethan's outstretched hand. Her tiny fingers were icy, almost stiff. The older boy followed suit, his grip hesitant at first, then tightening as another gust of wind cut through them. Ethan lifted the coughing toddler into his arms. The boy's head dropped to Ethan's shoulder, his small body trembling against him. Ethan took one last look around the park, nothing but blowing snow and the faint glow of distant streetlights. Whoever their mother was, she wasn't here, and waiting in the cold wasn't an option. He shifted the weight of the child in his arms, tightened his grip on the other two, and started walking toward the narrow street that led to his home. Each step crunched through the snow, the sound steady and deliberate. "Don't worry," he said quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for them to hear. "We'll figure the rest out when we get warm." The wind howled behind them, but he didn't look back. Ethan's walk through the snow felt longer with 3 children in tow and a toddler in his arms, but he kept his pace steady. The wind bit at his exposed arms where his jacket had been, and the toddler's weight made his muscles ache, yet he never loosened his grip. At last they turned onto a quiet side street where the dim light of a small, weathered house flickered weakly above the peeling paint and uneven steps. Inside, the air was cold but dry. The floorboards creaked under their boots. The living room was small, furnished with mismatched worn pieces, yet everything was neat and cared for. Photographs hung above the sagging couch, capturing moments of a little girl with chestnut hair and bright eyes. From the hallway, the same girl appeared, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy? You're home!" Her voice faded when she saw the children behind Ethan. "Emma, sweetheart," Ethan said gently, setting the toddler down so he could stand. "These are some friends who needed a place to warm up." Emma's eyes widened with curiosity, and she smiled shyly. "Hi." The three children shifted uneasily, clutching themselves, unsure how to act. The youngest clung to his sister's leg, still wearing Ethan's oversized jacket. Ethan hung his toolbox by the door and knelt to unlace their soaked boots. "Let's get those off so your toes don't freeze," he said, placing the boots near the old radiator that rattled softly. Emma sensed their hesitation and soon returned with a plastic bin. "Do you like Lego?" she asked, spilling colorful bricks onto the carpet with a warm, natural tone. Lucas glanced at Lily, who shrugged slightly. Within minutes, the three were kneeling on the rug beside Emma, fitting pieces together, their guarded expressions softening. From the tiny kitchen, Ethan called, "Emma, can you grab the mugs?" Heating water in a dented kettle, he poured it into one large mug with cocoa powder, stirring until it turned a rich brown. There was only enough for one. He carried the mug into the living room and placed it carefully in the center of their circle. "Share this, okay? Small sips, it's hot." They passed the mug around, their fingers gratefully warming on the cup. Even Emma, knowing there wouldn't be another for her, took only a tiny sip before passing it along. As the children played, Ethan noticed Lily clutching a worn stuffed bear with a torn ear and stuffing peeking out. Without a word, he retrieved an old sewing kit from the shelf and sat beside her. Her eyes followed his slow, careful fingers, threading a needle. The room was quiet except for the soft clinks of Lego bricks. When finished, he smoothed the bear's fur and handed it back. Lily's small hands closed around it, and for the first time that night, she smiled faintly. Ethan simply nodded, as if it was nothing. Far away, in the busy chaos of a police station, Olivia Bennett gripped her phone tightly. Her usually perfect blonde hair was loose around her face, and her elegant camel coat did nothing to hide her tension. "My children," she told the officer, voice tight but controlled, "were right next to me at the mall, and then—" She shook her head sharply, refusing to let panic take over. "They're 6 years old. Triplets, Lucas, Lily, and Liam. Please, you have to find them." The officer typed quickly, "Will alert all patrol units, ma'am." "Can you give me their descriptions again?" Olivia rattled off the details precisely, but her eyes betrayed fear as she scanned the room, as if expecting her children to walk in at any moment. Back in the quiet house, the radiator rattled softly, the Lego tower grew taller, and the patched-up teddy bear rested safely in a little girl's lap. Outside, snow continued to fall silently, blanketing the world as if holding its breath for what would come next. Ethan stayed alert for any sign of help after bringing the three children inside. While Emma kept them busy with Lego towers and whispered jokes, he went to the kitchen and carefully dialed the local police. "This is Ethan Walker," he said to the dispatcher. "I found 3 kids separated from their parents. They're safe but need to get home." He glanced toward Lily, showing Emma her patched-up teddy bear. "They're about 6, triplets." The dispatcher's voice was brisk. "We have a missing children report tonight. Stay put, an officer is on the way." Soon tires crunched over icy snow outside. Headlights swept the living room through thin curtains, and a sharp knock rattled the door. Ethan opened it to two officers, their breath visible in the cold, and a woman standing between them. She stepped forward, porchlight catching her blonde hair. Despite her bulky coat, she carried herself with an elegance that stood out against the worn house. Her eyes scanned the room, and upon seeing the children, relief flooded her face, nearly unsteadying her. "Lucas! Lily! Liam!" Her voice cracked as she rushed past Ethan, dropping to her knees on the rug. The kids ran into her arms, muffled sobs filling the room. Ethan stepped back, hands in pockets, partly for warmth, partly to give space. One officer leaned toward the woman, speaking softly. "You want us to check him out? Make sure there's no other motive?" The polite words carried a clear implication. Olivia Bennett. Ethan heard her name when she spoke, hesitated. She looked around. Patched couch, battered coffee table, mismatched mugs on the counter. Her gaze lingered on Ethan, work clothes dusted with snow, hair tousled, cracked knuckles. Her motherly instinct whispered caution. She had fought hard to protect her children from danger, now here in a stranger's home. Yet her eyes flicked back to the kids, now warm with scarves and mittens not their own. She shook her head. "No, he took care of them." Her tone was even, but she didn't move closer. Rising, smoothing her coat and holding Liam's mittened hand, she said, "Thank you. I appreciate you keeping them safe." Ethan shrugged. "Just doing what anyone would do." Her eyes searched his, as if weighing truth. Silence stretched, charged with the tension between two very different worlds. Olivia guided her children toward the door, officers holding it open. A cold gust blew in, making curtains flutter. As Lucas passed, Ethan slipped a small oatmeal cookie, made by Emma days before, into his coat pocket. Lucas looked up, startled, but Ethan winked and turned back inside. Olivia didn't see the gesture, busy holding Lily's hand tighter, stepping into the storm. As the door closed and their voices faded, Ethan stood alone in his small house, staring at the empty space where the children had been. Only an hour had passed since he found them shivering in the snow, yet their brief presence lingered, leaving more than wet footprints on the floorboards. The snow had been falling softly all morning as Olivia sat in her kitchen, the fireplace warmth failing to calm her restless thoughts. Across the table, Lucas, Lily, and Liam excitedly shared stories about Uncle Ethan and Emma, their voices overlapping with delight. Lily's eyes sparkled as she recalled how Emma let them use all her Lego pieces, even when their tower fell apart. Lucas leaned forward proudly, telling how Ethan had fixed Lily's torn bear, while Liam nodded seriously, clutching that very bear and mentioning how Ethan had given him his coat when he was cold. Olivia smiled faintly, but beneath that a mix of gratitude and unease stirred. Raised to be cautious, she knew that good intention sometimes masked hidden motives, and despite Ethan's kindness, her wariness lingered. That afternoon, driving home from a meeting, the snow intensified, slickening the roads and sharpening the air's chill. Suddenly, her car sputtered and slowed, then died. Pulling to the side, Olivia muttered under her breath, just about to call for help when the rumble of an old truck approached. A faded blue pickup stopped beside her, the driver's window rolling down. "You need a hand?" came the familiar voice. Ethan stepped out, boots crunching in the snow, clad in a thick flannel and worn vest, his breath misting in the cold. "Pop the hood," he instructed calmly. Olivia hesitated, then pulled the lever. Ethan's large hands moved expertly beneath the hood. "Loose connection," he murmured. "Got a wrench?" She fetched a small toolkit, handing him a wrench. Their fingers brushed, and she suddenly noticed how cold her hands were. "You're freezing," Ethan said, pulling off his only intact glove, a mismatched pair, and handing it to her without hesitation. "But your hands, they'll be fine," he cut in, turning back to the engine. Olivia slipped on the rough, worn glove, surprised by its warmth and the faint scent of motor oil and cedar. She watched Ethan work, his confident, no-nonsense manner quietly comforting. Minutes later, the engine coughed back to life. Ethan closed the hood with a firm thunk. "You're good to go." Olivia reached for her purse. "Let me pay you for your time." "No need," Ethan interrupted, shaking his head gently but firmly. She nodded, her thanks quiet as she climbed back into the car. Driving away, a warmth lingered in her chest, soon shadowed by hushed voices at a gas station stop. Two women whispered nearby. "Did you hear? That roofer, Ethan Walker, hanging around the Bennett kids." "Yeah, heard he's cozying up to their mom." "Can't blame him. She's a CEO with plenty of money. People like him know a good opportunity." Olivia's spine stiffened. "I'm just saying she should be careful. Folks from his part of town can be resourceful, not always in a good way." She kept a neutral face, paid for her coffee, and walked out, but her heart raced. Though she told herself it was gossip, the words dug deep, feeding a wariness she had carried since her marriage ended. That night, as she tucked her children into bed, their chatter about Emma and Ethan filled the room. Olivia smiled softly, kissed their foreheads, but her mind lingered elsewhere. Trust was fragile, and hers had been broken before. Across town, in a quiet home with a flickering porch light, Ethan sat oiling a wrench at the kitchen table. He thought of Olivia's polite smile earlier, how her eyes softened briefly before closing off again. He felt the distance growing, even in fleeting moments. "Guess she's figured out I'm not her kind of people," he muttered, setting down the wrench and rubbing his hands together. The memory of her cold fingers in his lingered, though he doubted she felt the same. Outside, snow continued to fall steadily, covering roads and rooftops, somewhere between two very different worlds. A fragile, invisible thread began to stretch, thin enough to snap, yet strong enough to hold. Olivia had been keeping her distance ever since that afternoon at the gas station. The whispered warnings weighed heavily on her chest, and she told herself she was just being careful, for her children's sake. Still, it was hard to ignore the disappointment in their faces whenever she suggested they stay home instead of visiting Emma. But the triplets were persistent. One Saturday morning, Lucas leaned against the kitchen counter with a pleading grin. "Please, Mom, Emma said she built a whole Lego city and needs help finishing it." Lily clasped her hands dramatically. "And she promised we could have hot cocoa again." Even quiet Liam added a small "please." Olivia sighed, pretending reluctance, though she already knew she'd give in. "Fine, but just for a little while." That afternoon she pulled up in front of Ethan's house. Snow had softened the rough edges of the neighborhood overnight. Emma flung the door open with a delighted smile, and the children tumbled inside, voices carrying into the small living room. Ethan appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Hey," he greeted politely, meeting Olivia's gaze briefly before looking toward the kids. She nodded coolly. "I'll pick them up in an hour." When she returned earlier than planned, the Lego city was still under construction, bricks scattered across the carpet. The children's laughter hushed when they saw her at the doorway. Emma glanced between her father and Olivia, sensing the subtle chill in the air. Ethan stood and helped the triplets into their coats. His eyes met Olivia's momentarily, steady but unreadable, with something muted she hadn't noticed before. He said nothing about her early arrival. As they stepped outside, Emma tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "Daddy, can I run over to Mrs. Peterson's to give her these?" She held up a brown paper bag. Ethan nodded absently. "Sure, just be quick." What he didn't see was Olivia leaning down to whisper in Emma's ear before they left. The bag wasn't for Mrs. Peterson. It was filled with homemade bread and stew Olivia had cooked that morning. "Tell him it's from a neighbor," she whispered. She didn't want Ethan to know it was from her. Part pride, part a stubborn wall she still kept between them. 2 nights later, snow turned to ice. The streets glittered dangerously under the street lamp's weak glow. Olivia was driving the triplets to Ethan's when the tires lost grip on a curve. The steering wheel jerked in her hands. The car skidded toward the edge, where a deep ditch waited. The children screamed. Olivia's heart slammed as she fought the wheel, but the car slid helplessly, metal scraping ice. The front tires hung inches from the drop when the vehicle shuddered to a stop. Before she caught her breath, Ethan's front door banged open. He sprinted out, boots slipping on ice. He yanked open the back door, pulling Lucas, then Lily, then Liam out, holding each close before setting them safely on the snowy shoulder. "Inside, now!" he ordered Emma, who had run out in slippers. Finally, he turned to Olivia. "Come on," he said, extending his hand. She hesitated, pulse racing, then placed her cold, trembling hand in his. He braced his weight and pulled her out, steadying her as her knees threatened to give way. For a long moment, neither spoke. Olivia's breath came in sharp bursts, cold air searing her lungs. She looked at him, snow dusting his hair, jaw tight, warmth in his eyes despite the biting wind, and felt her guard slip. Just a fraction. He crouched, wrapping an arm around all 3 children at once. They clung to him, faces pressed against his shoulders, as if instinctively knowing he would not let go. Olivia watched, breath slowing. Something softened in her expression. "Thank you," she whispered, voice nearly lost in the wind. After a pause, "Truly." He met her gaze, voice even, just doing what anyone would do. Later, driving home slowly, hands tight on the wheel, she knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would run into cold, risk a fall on ice, to pull strangers to safety. Yet, as much as she wanted to ignore the cruel gossip and her own doubts, the walls in her mind didn't crumble all at once. Ethan lived in a world far from hers, and she wasn't ready to admit she wanted to cross that distance. Across town, Ethan sat quietly, rubbing lingering chill from his fingers. 2 different worlds, he thought, the phrase echoing in his head. And she knows it as well as I do. The storm arrived faster than anyone expected. By mid-afternoon, the sky turned slate gray, and the wind howled fiercely. Snow blew sideways, piling high against houses and burying cars up to their windows. Power lines drooped under Isa's weight, and one by one, neighborhood lights flickered out. Inside Ethan's small house, the air quickly cooled. The old radiator gave a weak groan before falling silent. Ethan lit the few emergency candles, their soft glow barely holding back the dark. Emma lay curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her cheeks flushed. Lucas shivered beside her, while Lily and Liam huddled under another blanket on the floor. Fever had struck all 4 children at once. Ethan opened the medicine cabinet, knowing what to expect. The small basket was nearly empty. A half bottle of children's aspirin rattled weakly, only enough for 2 doses. Far too little for the night ahead. Behind him, Olivia's voice broke through with panic. "The roads are closed, Ethan. No one's going anywhere in this weather." Her hand rested protectively on Lucas's head, her hair tousled, worry deep in her eyes. Ethan faced her, calm but determined. "I've already lost someone I loved," he said steadily over the wind's howl. "I'm not letting any of these kids be in danger. Before she could argue, he pulled on his thick flannel, layered another sweater, then his old winter coat, worn and torn. Wrapping a scarf around his neck, he tugged on boots and a knit cap with a hole near the crown. Old, but enough. "You can't," Olivia started. "I have to," he said, tying the scarf tight, leaving no room for debate. The door slammed behind him, and the wind hit like a wall. Snow stung his face as blinding sheets swept the streets, nearly erasing everything. Halfway to the main road, a snowmobile's roar came from the side. Its headlights cut through the storm, swerving just in time to miss him by inches. Ethan stumbled, the rush of air and snow knocking him off balance. He hit the ice hard. For a moment, winded and cold, he lay still. Then, the thought of Emma's flushed cheeks and the triplets' tired eyes pushed him up. He pressed on, leaning into the gale. By the pharmacy, his gloves were ice-stiff and fingers numb. The lights inside were off. The closed sign hung on the door. He pounded, breath steaming. A man appeared, shook his head, pointing to posted hours. "Please," Ethan's voice cracked. 4 sick kids at home, high fevers, not enough medicine for the night. Something in his plea moved the man. After a pause, the lock clicked, and Ethan slipped inside. Minutes later, he emerged with fever reducer, electrolyte drinks, and heat packs tucked into his pockets. At home, Olivia sat on the couch, Emma's head in her lap, triplets close on either side. Candlelight flickered across her face as she imagined the pain if Ethan didn't return. Guilt gnawed at her for doubting him, for letting others' voices shape her view. The door burst open, cold wind swirling in, and there he stood, snow clinging to coat, breath harsh, hair damp from melting ice. He closed the door with his shoulder, setting supplies on the table. Without thinking, Olivia dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around his stiff, cold frame. Her tears mixed with melting snow on his shoulders. "I was wrong about you," she whispered, voice breaking. Ethan's arms rose hesitantly, then held her. "Doesn't matter," he murmured. "They're safe now." Later, after the children took medicine and lay tucked in blankets, Olivia sat at the table tending Ethan's scraped hands. Her fingers fumbled the bandage. "You're wrapping it backward," he teased with a grin. "Oh, am I?" she said, flustered. "CEO of a big company, and you can't even bandage a hand?" His warm tone made her smile despite herself. The children giggled from the couch, breaking the evening's tension. For the first time in days, the air felt lighter, even as the storm raged outside. The storm had passed, leaving behind a town draped in thick snow, and a silence so deep it seemed to soak into the walls. The streets were still lined with icy drifts, but life had begun to stir again. Olivia and the children came by Ethan's house often now, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to sit by the fire while the kids played. Whatever distance had once stood between them had thinned since the night of the blizzard. The triplets no longer hesitated to run into Ethan's arms, and Olivia no longer kept herself standing stiffly at the doorway. Even the neighbors, who once whispered over their coffee, had started to soften their tone after witnessing him pull Olivia and the children out of that near accident weeks ago. Still, not all doubts were gone. One evening, after Olivia and the kids had left, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, oiling a wrench while Emma colored beside him. He watched her for a long moment before speaking. "Emma," he said quietly, "I'm not sure I belong in their world." Emma put down her crayon. "What do you mean? They've got a different life. A bigger life. People might think—" He hesitated, rubbing the edge of the wrench with his thumb. "They might think I'm just after something that's not mine." Emma tilted her head, studying him with a kind of seriousness only a child could manage. "But you're not," she said simply. "You're just you, and she knows that." The next day, the children put their own plan into motion. Lucas, Lily, Liam, and Emma huddled together on the front porch, whispering like conspirators. "We just have to get them alone," Lucas said, "so they'll talk. Or maybe kiss," Lily added with a giggle. Emma rolled her eyes but smiled. "Leave that to them." That afternoon, the four of them ran into the garage where Ethan was tinkering with an old carburetor. "Can we see how you fix things?" Liam asked innocently. Ethan glanced up. "Sure," but before he could finish, they darted inside, pulling Olivia in with them. Then, as if by magic, or more likely, careful planning, the door swung shut and the latch clicked. Olivia blinked at the sudden quiet, glancing toward the closed door. "Did they just lock us in?" Ethan set down his tools, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "Looks that way." Silence settled, broken only by the ticking of the space heater. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Olivia, I don't want anyone thinking you chose the wrong person." She turned to face him fully, her expression soft but steady. "Ethan, I don't need someone who matches me dollar for dollar. I need someone who matches me heart for heart." He looked at her as if trying to believe her, the wariness in his eyes giving way to something warmer. "You've done something for me that no one else could," she continued. "You've shown me what it feels like not to be alone. And it has nothing to do with money or status. It's because you care, and because you're brave enough to act when it matters." The weight of her words seemed to sink into him, loosening the knot he'd carried for so long. He took a slow step toward her. Outside the garage door, 4 small faces were pressed to the narrow window. Lucas leaned in toward Emma and whispered, "Are they gonna kiss yet?" Emma elbowed him gently. "Shh, let them be." The sound of muffled giggling gave them away. Ethan's head turned toward the window, and he caught sight of the row of wide-eyed onlookers. "You little spies," he called, grinning. The children scattered with squeals of laughter, their boots thumping on the porch. Olivia laughed too, shaking her head. But when she looked back at him, the humor softened into something quieter, and he saw no hesitation in her eyes. For the first time, he let himself believe she meant every word. A year later, winter finally released its hold on the small town. The last patches of snow melted away, revealing a clear blue sky dotted with soft clouds. Main Street buzzed gently with the fresh energy of spring. At a corner lot where an old gas station once stood, a simple sign read, "Walker's Auto Repair," hanging above freshly painted doors. The sign was plain, its paint chipped in one corner, but to Ethan, it symbolized a dream realized. Inside, the garage smelled faintly of motor oil and fresh coffee. Tools hung neatly on the walls, and the workbench bore marks of many dedicated hours. Olivia stood nearby, her blonde hair catching sunlight pouring through the open door. Gone was the sharp corporate attire. She dressed simply now. Lily and Emma organized a box of wrenches, while Lucas and Liam playfully polished the hood of an old Chevy, competing to see who could make it shine brightest. There was no longer her side or his side, just one family moving forward together. "Lady, my family and I finally introduced ourselves. You must ask me no questions, or I will rend your family apart." Later that week, Olivia addressed a crowd at the town hall during the launch of the Single Father Support Fund. Neighbors, reporters, and guests filled the room. "This foundation was inspired by a man who taught me that wealth isn't about bank accounts or shares," she said, locking eyes with Ethan in the audience. "True wealth lies in kindness, courage, and giving when you have little to spare." Ethan Walker showed me that. Ethan shifted uncomfortably but smiled faintly. The celebration moved outside to a nearby park, where picnic tables sat under budding maple trees. The scent of grilled food mingled with fresh grass, and children darted between tables, their laughter filling the air. Ethan stood by a picnic bench, holding a large sandwich he'd made. Thick bread, fresh greens, generous ham slices. He sliced it carefully, sharing pieces with anyone who passed by empty-handed. Lucas took a piece and grinned up at Ethan. "This time, you didn't have to share, but you still did." Ethan chuckled, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Some habits are worth keeping." As afternoon faded, families gathered on the grass. Olivia spread a blanket in dappled shade. Children kicked off their shoes and chased one another barefoot. The air hummed with rustling leaves, buzzing bees, and joyous laughter. Olivia leaned her head gently on Ethan's shoulder. He turned slightly to meet the soft smile that told him she was exactly where she wanted to be. Sunlight filtered through young leaves, casting playful patterns across their faces. Flowers swayed in a gentle breeze, petals drifting down like silent blessings. Ethan's gaze swept over the scene, the children, now siblings in all but blood, the shared picnic, and two lives once worlds apart, now beautifully intertwined. His chest tightened with certainty, not doubt. He looked down at Olivia, voice low and sure. "We're a family now." She didn't look away or reply. Her hand found his, fingers entwining. The moments stretched as memory's lens pulled back, over the blanket, the running children, the blooming park. Laughter soared like music into the spring air, carrying the story of a man, a woman, and 4 children who turned a winter act of kindness into a lifetime of shared love. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey of kindness, courage, and love, overcoming all odds. If Ethan and Olivia's story touched your soul as much as it did ours, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more real-life tales that heal, inspire, and remind us of the power of compassion. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change your life. Until next time, keep your heart open and your kindness flowing. We'll see you in the next story.